Attorney Deborah Blum joins me now here on set to break down the developments from a legal perspective. And we want to give you a heads up that in a moment we'll also be joined by CBS News' Natalie. She is outside of the Labor Department. But Deborah, of course, welcome. Let me begin with you. What we heard in Acosta's press conference was an explanation of why his department kept the 2008 plea deal a secret from the victims. We do know that a judge effectively ruled that that decision was illegal. In the press conference, Acosta seemed to shift blame, though, to a career prosecutor down there in Florida. He pushed everything onto the state level. What do you make of his justification for that and what the law says?
Well, I don't agree that he shifted blame. I think he's saying that others that are in law enforcement, special agents, as well as other prosecutors, agreed with the decision to go with a federal indictment and then allow him to take a state deal. So ultimately, at that time, we had a very different climate. It wasn't the Me Too era. The victims then were hesitant to go forward. By having the state plea deal, that allowed Epstein to become a sex offender. He did have to serve some jail time, although in a very unorthodox way. I fully agree that he did get a very, very lenient sentence and a very, very favorable deal. But there must have been some mitigating factors that we might not be aware of, especially the victims probably not wanting to cooperate with the prosecution.
Now, I just want to say, we're talking about 2008, though, not 1908. I really don't understand what he means by that being a different time. If he's aware that this man is an alleged sex offender, he's already said that it was very unusual for the state to offer even what they were offering. Couldn't he then step in and make those corrections and, if he wanted to, seek more answers, speak to more victims, as the Southern District has even put Epstein's face up and a number out saying, if you know anything, call us? Couldn't he have done that back then?
You know, I think that we have to stop attacking the people that are involved in this. I think that what happened in the past has to stay in the past. There's a plea deal in place. We can't go back and undo that. Decisions are made. Things may have come to light that we're not aware of. His office did give a very favorable deal. I've represented people in sex crimes, and I do have to say that in today's day and age, even 2008 versus now, the prosecution goes forward with a lot greater zealousness at now versus then.
Okay, and we've got Natalie Brand, who, as we mentioned, is outside the Labor Department. Natalie, why did Acosta give this press conference in the first place? He noted how unusual it was even for him to speak publicly about this. Is this about him being worried and hang on to his job, or is there something else at play?
Well, Errol, CBS News has learned that it was President Trump who actually encouraged Secretary Acosta to give this news conference and talk about some of his actions as U.S. attorney. And we heard Secretary Acosta in a very calm way defend his handling of that past Florida case, essentially step by step, addressing every single one of the major concerns brought to light by the media attention on this old case, as well as by his critics and Democratic lawmakers. So he, in this news conference, did not appear to be concerned about his job. But at the same time, we know that President Trump yesterday, while defending his job as labor secretary, also said that the White House will have to carefully look at the handling of this case. And that's something that is under review right now by the DOJ investigation that was opened back in February into this very plea deal reached by Secretary Acosta back when he was the U.S. attorney.
Right, and Acosta did say that he's willing to speak and be interviewed, even though he's not required to, as part of that investigation into his decision-making. Now, he was also asked several times about his role in certifying visas for victims of sex trafficking. He was criticized for a new provision that brings other agencies into that process. What did he say when asked if he could be trusted now to help victims and enforce human trafficking laws?
Yeah, this came up in the course of the nearly hour that he was answering questions by reporters on a variety of topics, mainly focusing on this Florida case. But that sex trafficking provision also came up. He talked about the new policy putting in place a requirement that a criminal prosecutor should be consulted anytime one of the issues is brought forward. And he said, quote, "That seems reasonable. Don't we want criminal prosecutors to be consulted?" Then he also said that prosecutors, if they decide they are not moving forward with a case, that the division would still consider whether to issue a visa. So he said that recent criticism and reporting on this issue had been somewhat mischaracterized, defending the decision there, as well as, again, some of the larger issues raised over the course of his career.
And Deborah, let's look at this from Epstein's perspective. His lawyers are now arguing that the Florida plea deal sought to resolve globally this entire case against him, and that's why they say these current federal charges should be dismissed. But federal prosecutors in New York say, not so fast. You know, we're a different jurisdiction, and we don't count as part of that agreement. Which side has a stronger case here?
Well, he made a deal with the U.S. government, so absolutely it should bar any prosecution. But if you break this down further, it's likely that the Florida acts that are charged in the current indictment might have to be thrown out and not be allowed to be used against him in the prosecution.
And why is that?
The plea deal specifically said that the acts charged, the overt acts between the time frame 2002 and 2005 are covered by that plea deal. So he was previously indicted for similar acts. So those acts are covered by that indictment, which he entered into the non-prosecution agreement and got the state plea deal. It did not say anything about New York acts. So he's currently charged with sex trafficking and conspiracy in New York, as well as Florida. So I think that the non-prosecution agreement should absolutely cover the Florida acts that are charged in this indictment, and the question of whether that also applies to New York state charges, which are the sex acts that he's alleged to have done with these young women in his home. That's going to have to be hashed out in court, and precedent is going to have to be applied and analyzed and see if they could get the whole thing thrown out. Most likely the New York charges will go forward.
What do you make of the new accuser? There's a new accuser who's been speaking out, Jennifer Arraez. She's not a part currently of the Southern District of New York's case, but she reportedly plans to file a lawsuit against him in August. How does that complicate or clarify what's happening?
I don't think that has any bearing whatsoever on the current prosecution. They have their alleged victims who've cooperated with the government. They have an indictment, so those individuals were probably before the grand jury. So this could be used in the federal case as something called an uncharged act. But in the federal system, it's very difficult to get in uncharged acts. In the state system, it's easier for the prosecution to use uncharged acts. But in the federal system, there's a higher burden to actually get that evidence in. So I don't think that this new victim, alleged victim, is going to have any bearing on the federal case.
It's very interesting. And Natalie, Secretary Acosta repeatedly spoke about the horrors faced by these victims, but at any point did he have anything to say to alleged victims?
Well, Errol, he acknowledged the trauma that they've been through. He was asked whether he would apologize to the victims, and he kind of sidestepped this by, again, talking about the pain they've gone through. He was even asked whether he would sit down with the victims in the Florida case and reference the ongoing court matter involving the violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. So he was very careful in answering this question. No direct apology from what I heard, but again, he did appear sympathetic to victims in general, saying now is a different time for victims to come forward. And we heard again and again him call for victims to come forward. He called Epstein a, quote, bad man, said that he did deserve a stiffer sentence, and hopes that other jurisdictions, if there are cases to be brought forward, prosecute. He's reiterated that he's pleased this new New York case is moving forward. But again, he's very careful about the wording, the phrasing he uses in his handling of that past Florida case, which is under so much scrutiny right now.
Yeah, I saw him continue to reference the notes he had, even as he was trying to answer the many questions there posed by reporters. Deborah Blum with me here in New York, and Natalie Brand there in Washington. Thank you both very much.